I used to believe in fairy tales. Not the kind with dragons and princesses locked in towers, but the kind where love conquers all and wedding vows actually mean something. For 12 years, I thought I was living in one with Richard. We met in graduate school, both ambitious literature students with dreams of writing novels that would change the world. He had these gentle brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he laughed, and hands that always seemed to find mine across a crowded room. Our Boston apartment became our sanctuary, small and cramped, with bookshelves that threatened to collapse under the weight of our combined libraries, but it was ours. Every night, we'd curl up on our second-hand sofa, drinking cheap wine and reading passages from our favorite books to each other. I remember thinking, this is it. This is what happiness feels like. When Richard's first novel was published, I threw him a surprise party. I invited all our friends, decorated our apartment with quotes from his book, and made his favorite lemon cake from scratch. He lifted me off my feet that night, spinning me around our tiny living room, whispering how he couldn't have done it without me. I believed him. My own writing career never quite took off the same way. I was teaching English at the community college while working on a manuscript that seemed perpetually unfinished. Richard always encouraged me, though. "You're the real talent," he'd say. I just got lucky. His support felt like oxygen, necessary, life-giving. The first hairline fracture in our perfect life appeared so subtly I almost missed it. A missed dinner here, a forgotten anniversary there, late nights at his publisher's office that stretched longer and longer. I told myself it was normal. Success changes schedules, not hearts. When he suggested I take a break from my own writing to help edit his second novel, I saw it as an opportunity to be part of his world. I poured myself into his words, improving his sentences, strengthening his characters, all while my own stories gathered dust. "You have a gift for this," he told me, kissing my forehead as I handed him my notes. "We make the perfect team." The pride in his voice made me forget about my abandoned manuscript. His second book was even more successful than the first. Suddenly, there were book tours, speaking engagements, literary festivals. I rearranged my teaching schedule to travel with him when I could, but increasingly found myself alone in our apartment, watching his success unfold through social media posts and text messages. "I miss you," I'd text him late at night. "Miss you too. Exhausted. Talk tomorrow," would come the reply, sometimes hours later. Friends started asking about my own writing, and I'd smile, saying I was taking a break to support Richard. "What a supportive wife," they'd say, and I'd wear that label like a badge of honor. Nobody seemed to notice how my eyes had lost their spark, or how I'd stopped talking about my own dreams. The nights grew longer. The silence in our apartment became a living thing, crawling into bed with me, wrapping itself around my chest until I could barely breathe. I started sleeping on his side of the bed, just to feel closer to him. The scent of his cologne on his pillow became my nightly comfort. Then came the invitation to the Meadowbrook Literary Festival. Richard was to be the keynote speaker, and for the first time in months, he suggested I join him. "It'll be like a second honeymoon," he promised, his eyes bright with something I mistook for love. "The old stone hotel, walks by the lake. You'll love it." I spent weeks preparing, buying a new dress, getting my hair done, even pitching some freelance articles, so I'd have something of my own to talk about. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Not just Richard Anderson's wife, but Claire Anderson, writer and woman with her own voice. I should have known that fairy tales are just that. Tales. Stories we tell ourselves because the truth is too hard to bear. What I didn't know as I packed my suitcase for Meadowbrook was that the illusion I'd been living in was about to shatter completely, and no amount of believing in happy endings would put the pieces back together again. The Meadowbrook Literary Festival was held in a renovated Victorian hotel with sprawling gardens and a view of the lake that stole my breath away. When we arrived, Richard was immediately whisked away for a pre-festival meeting, leaving me to check into our room alone. The young woman at reception typed on her computer, then frowned. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Anderson. I only see a reservation for one under your husband's name." A small knot formed in my stomach. There must be a mistake. My husband specifically mentioned he booked for both of us. She clicked through several screens. The reservation was changed last week to a single occupancy. but we have another room available if you'd like." "Changed?" The word hung in the air between us. "By whom?" "It says here, by Mr. Anderson himself." I forced a smile, heat rising to my cheeks. "There's been a misunderstanding. I'll take the additional room, please." Later, when I confronted Richard in the hotel lobby, he seemed genuinely surprised. "I thought I told you, Claire. My publisher wanted me to stay in the executive suite for meetings. I assumed you'd be fine with your own room. More space for both of us, right?" He kissed my cheek, his hand briefly touching my waist. "I need to head to another meeting. We'll catch up at dinner." But dinner never happened. A text message informed me he was dining with potential investors for a film adaptation of his book. I sat alone in the hotel restaurant, pushing salmon around my plate while watching other couples lean toward each other, laughing and sharing wine. The next morning was Richard's keynote speech. I sat in the front row, beaming with pride despite my disappointment from the night before. He was magnificent on stage, charismatic, witty, commanding the room with an easy confidence. I remembered when he used to practice presentations in our living room, nervous and seeking my reassurance. "I'd like to thank my incredible team," he said at the end of his speech. "My agent, Mark, my publisher, Harper Edge, and most importantly, my brilliant editor, Sophia Wells, without whom this book would never have reached its potential." My hands froze mid-clap. I was his editor. I had spent months refining his manuscript, suggesting plot changes, strengthening his prose. Yet my name wasn't even worth mentioning. After the speech, I spotted Richard surrounded by admirers. Next to him stood a woman with copper hair cascading down her back, her hand resting comfortably on his arm. She leaned in to whisper something, and he laughed. That full-bodied laugh I hadn't heard in months. The intimacy between them was unmistakable. I approached slowly, heart hammering against my ribs. Richard's eyes widened slightly when he saw me. "Claire, there you are. I was just telling Sophia about you." His voice was too loud, too enthusiastic. "Sophia, this is my wife, Claire. Claire, this is Sophia Wells, my editor at Harper Edge." Sophia extended her hand, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Lovely to finally meet you. Richard speaks so highly of you. Funny, he's never mentioned you." The words escaped before I could stop them. An uncomfortable silence followed. Richard cleared his throat. "Sophia and I need to meet with some festival organizers. I'll see you later?" Without waiting for my response, they walked away, his hand guiding her by the small of her back, exactly how he used to guide me. I returned to my room, mind spinning. Opening my laptop, I searched for Sophia Wells. Her professional profile showed she'd joined Harper Edge 8 months ago, right around the time Richard's late nights began. I scrolled through her social media, each post making me feel sicker. There she was at literary events I'd been too busy teaching to attend. There she was holding a first edition of Richard's new book, captioned, "So proud of this one." Then I found it. A photo from 3 months ago at a cafe I recognized. Our cafe, where Richard and I had spent countless Sundays reading the paper and sharing croissants. They were sitting at our table, coffee mugs raised in a toast, sunlight catching on something metallic on her hand. I zoomed in until my screen was filled with the image of a vintage emerald ring, my grandmother's ring that had gone missing from my jewelry box last spring. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Meeting running late. Don't wait up." With trembling fingers, I opened our banking app, an account I hadn't checked in months because Richard had insisted on handling our finances while I focused on teaching. Page after page of transactions unfolded before me. Dinner charges at restaurants I'd never visited, hotel rooms on weekends he'd claimed to be at writing retreats, a charge from Tiffany & Co. on my birthday for a gift I never received. The truth didn't hit me all at once. It unraveled slowly, like a sweater caught on a nail, until I was left holding nothing but loose threads of what I thought was my life. Morning found me still sitting in the hotel armchair, having not slept a minute. My eyes burned and my body felt hollowed out, as if someone had scooped away everything inside me and left only an empty shell. The sunlight streaming through the curtains I'd forgotten to close seemed offensive in its cheerfulness. I called the front desk and extended my stay by one night. I couldn't face returning to Boston yet, to our apartment filled with books we'd annotated together, photographs of happier times. The coffee mugs we'd bought on our honeymoon in Portugal. Everything that had once represented our love now felt like props in an elaborate play where I was the only one who didn't know my lines. Richard had never come back to his room. I knew because I'd sat in the hallway outside his door until 3 a.m., waiting to confront him, before a sympathetic night manager had gently suggested I return to my own room. "Get some rest, honey," she'd said, her eyes filled with a knowing pity that made me want to scream. I ordered room service coffee but couldn't drink it. The festival continued around me. I could hear excited conversations in the hallway, laughter from the gardens below. The literary world spinning on while mine had ground to a halt. My phone kept lighting up with messages from Richard. "Where are you? We need to talk. You're overreacting. It's not what you think." Each notification felt like another small cut. I finally turned off my phone and dropped it into the hotel safe, locking it away as if I could lock away the pain with it. Around noon, someone knocked on my door. I peered through the peephole, half expecting to see Richard. Instead, it was Sophia, looking far less confident than she had yesterday. I considered pretending I wasn't there, but some masochistic part of me needed to see her up close, to understand what she had that I didn't. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "I think we should talk," she said, her voice softer than I'd imagined it would be. "I think you've taken enough from me already." She flinched at that, having the decency to look ashamed. "I didn't know about you at first. By the time I found out, things were already—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "Were already what? Passionate? Meaningful? Real?" My voice cracked on the last word. "As opposed to our marriage of 12 years, which was clearly just an inconvenient detail. He said you were separated, that you stayed together for appearances but lived separate lives." She twisted the emerald ring, my ring, on her finger. "He said you were pursuing your own relationships." A laugh escaped me, harsh and unfamiliar. "And you believe that? Did you never wonder why he never took you to our home? Why you always met in hotels or at your place? Why there were never any divorce papers?" Her face crumpled slightly. "There were always explanations. He said you were fragile, that you'd threatened self-harm if he left. The cruelty of the lie knocked the wind from me. I'd never been anything but supportive, sacrificing my own ambitions to bolster his. And this was how he portrayed me? As some unstable, clinging woman? I was never going to come here," Sophia continued. "Richard insisted you'd be at your mother's this weekend. When I saw you in the audience," she shook her head, "I knew something wasn't right." "How long?" I managed to ask. 9 months. 9 months. While I was teaching freshman composition and helping students find their voices, my husband had been finding his way into another woman's bed. While I was staying up late grading papers, he was staying up late whispering promises to her. While I was editing his novel, believing I was contributing to our shared dream, he was planning a future that didn't include me. "He's asked me to move in with him," she said quietly. "He told me last night he's going to ask you for a divorce when you get back to Boston." The hallway seemed to tilt beneath my feet. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself. "I thought you should hear it from me," she continued. "I never meant to hurt anyone. That's the problem with affairs," I said, finding strength in my own voice. "Everyone's so focused on their desires that they forget about the damage they're causing until it's too late." I closed the door then, not wanting to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. I made it to the bathroom before the tears came, violent, body-shaking sobs that seemed to rise from the depths of my soul. I cried for the woman I'd been, for the love I thought was real, for the years I'd never get back. When the tears finally subsided, I caught sight of myself in the mirror, red-eyed, pale, hair tangled from the night spent in an armchair. But behind the devastation, I saw something else, the faintest glimmer of resolve. A small voice inside me whispered that I'd survived before I met Richard Anderson, and I would survive after him. I splashed cold water on my face and took a deep breath. Then I retrieved my phone from the safe and turned it on. Ignoring Richard's increasingly desperate messages, I opened my banking app again. This time, I wasn't looking for evidence of his betrayal. I was looking for what was mine. I left Meadowbrook without saying goodbye to Richard. The coward in me wanted to flee, to disappear without confrontation. But the pragmatist knew I needed to secure my future first. I used our joint credit card one last time to book a flight back to Boston, arriving hours before Richard would return. Our apartment, the home I'd lovingly created while he built his career, felt like a museum of lies. Photos of us smiling on beaches, at book launches, at friends' weddings mocked me from every surface. I walked from room to room, touching familiar objects that suddenly seemed to belong to strangers. The coffee table where we'd propped our feet while reading drafts to each other. The kitchen where I'd perfected his favorite lemon ricotta pancakes. The desk where I'd edited his novel, unknowingly helping him build the success that had given him the confidence to leave me. Moving mechanically, I gathered essentials: clothes, toiletries, my laptop, and the manuscript I'd abandoned. In the back of our closet, behind winter coats, I found the fireproof box containing our important documents. Inside were our marriage certificate, property deeds, insurance policies, and bank statements I hadn't seen in years. What I discovered in those documents made my knees buckle. While I'd been dutifully depositing my teaching salary into our joint account, Richard had opened a separate account where his growing royalties and advances were being funneled. An account I had no access to. An account with a balance that made my breath catch. The depth of his betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was financial, too. He'd been planning his exit strategy for longer than I'd realized. I took photos of every document with trembling hands, then called Jessica, my college roommate who'd become a divorce attorney. "I need your help," I said when she answered. "And I need a place to stay." "Claire? What's happened?" The concern in her voice nearly broke me. "Richard's been having an affair. He's been hiding money. He's planning to divorce me." Saying the words out loud made them real in a way that still felt surreal. "Pack a bag and come over. Don't tell him where you're going." 2 hours later, I sat at Jessica's kitchen table as she reviewed the photos of our financial documents, her expression growing grimmer with each swipe. "He's been diverting significant funds," she confirmed. "But Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state. Half of everything acquired during the marriage is rightfully yours, including his royalties and advances for books you helped edit." She looked up at me, her gaze sharp. "When did you last access your joint accounts?" "Months ago. Richard said he'd handle the finances while I was busy teaching." Jessica's mouth tightened. "We need to move quickly. He might try to transfer funds once he realizes you know." We spent the evening on her laptop, securing what was legally mine. We transferred half the funds from our joint accounts into a new account in my name only. Jessica helped me file an emergency petition to freeze the assets in Richard's separate account pending divorce proceedings. We changed passwords on my email, social media, and phone accounts. "What about the apartment?" I asked, exhaustion settling into my bones. "Whose name is on the lease?" "Both of ours, but I found the rent payments are coming from his secret account. Then it's still half yours legally. But do you want to stay there?" The thought of returning to that space, sleeping in that bed, cooking in that kitchen, each corner haunted by memories of what I thought we had, made my stomach turn. "No, you can stay here as long as you need," Jessica offered, squeezing my hand. "The important thing is that you've protected yourself financially. Many people in your situation don't think clearly enough to do that. But I wasn't thinking clearly. I was operating on autopilot, fueled by a cold rage that kept the heartbreak at bay. I knew the pain was waiting for me, a vast bottomless ocean ready to pull me under once the adrenaline faded. My phone had been buzzing all day with messages from Richard. I'd silenced it but couldn't resist checking once. "Claire, where are you? I came home and you're gone. We need to talk. This isn't like you. I'm worried. Please just let me know you're safe. I know you're upset, but this is childish. If you would just listen to my side of things." Each message revealed more of who he truly was. A man who could betray me for months and still expect me to consider his feelings. A man who could call my pain childish while expecting me to listen to his side, as if there could be any explanation that would make his actions acceptable. I typed a single response. "I know everything. My lawyer will contact yours." Then I blocked his number. That night, lying on Jessica's guest bed, I finally let myself feel the full weight of what had happened. The tears came again, but different this time. Quieter, resigned. I cried not just for the loss of my marriage, but for the loss of the woman I'd been, the trusting, devoted woman who had shelved her own dreams to support someone else's. She was gone now, and I wasn't sure who would emerge from the ashes of her innocence. But for the first time since Meadowbrook, I felt a flicker of curiosity about who that might be. 3 weeks passed before I saw Richard face to face. 3 weeks of finding a small studio apartment I could afford on my teaching salary. 3 weeks of friends choosing sides, of sympathetic looks, of explaining to my department chair why I needed a different office since Richard occasionally visited campus. 3 weeks of Jessica building our case, documenting every hidden asset, every manipulative financial move. The mediation was set for a Thursday morning in a sterile downtown office with views of Boston Harbor. Jessica had warned me to expect Richard to bring his own attorney, probably someone high-powered and expensive, meant to intimidate me. What I hadn't expected was to see Sophia sitting in the waiting area outside the conference room. She rose when she saw me, her face a mask of discomfort. "Claire, Don't." I held up my hand. "Whatever you're about to say, save it for someone who cares." Jessica stepped between us, her voice low but firm. "Ms. Wells, this is a private legal proceeding. Unless you're a party to this divorce or legal counsel, you need to wait elsewhere." Sophia backed away, her eyes never leaving mine. "I just wanted to return something." She pulled a small velvet pouch from her purse and held it out to me. Through the dark fabric, I could make out the shape of my grandmother's ring. I stared at the offering, this pitiful attempt at absolution. "Keep it," I said finally. "Consider it the price of your education." I walked past her into the conference room, my heart hammering but my steps steady. Richard was already seated, looking thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under his eyes. For a moment, I felt a treacherous pang of concern before reminding myself that his suffering was self-inflicted. Beside him sat a silver-haired man in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Claire." Richard stood, his voice catching. "You look—" "Let's skip the small talk," I interrupted, taking my seat. "We're not friends catching up. We're not even acquaintances. We're two people dissolving a legal contract that you violated in every possible way." His attorney cleared his throat. "Mrs. Anderson, I'm Lawrence Bennett. I understand this is an emotional time, but hostility won't help us reach an amicable resolution." Jessica smiled thinly. "My client isn't being hostile, Mr. Bennett. She's being direct. And it's Ms. Winters now. She's reverted to her maiden name." The revelation seemed to hit Richard like a physical blow. Good. Let him feel a fraction of the shock I'd felt. For the next 2 hours, we negotiated the division of our life together. The apartment lease that neither of us wanted to keep. The furniture we'd collected. The rights to royalties from books I'd helped edit. With each item, I felt pieces of my past being cataloged and distributed, like artifacts from a civilization that no longer existed. When we took a brief recess, Richard followed me into the hallway. "Claire, please. Can we talk privately? Just for a moment." Against Jessica's advice, I agreed, following him to a small alcove by the elevator. "I know I hurt you," he began, his voice low and urgent. "I know I betrayed your trust. But 12 years, don't they count for anything?" "They counted for everything to me," I replied. "That's the difference between us. I never meant for any of this to happen. Sophia, things weren't good between us, Claire. You know that. We were drifting apart." I laughed then, a sound so hollow it echoed in the small space between us. "We weren't drifting, Richard. You were paddling away while I was trying to keep us afloat. Don't rewrite our history to justify your choices." His eyes hardened slightly. "You were so consumed with your teaching, with trying to write your own book. Don't you dare." My voice shook with fury. "Don't you dare blame me for pursuing my own dreams while I was supporting yours. I edited your book. I rearranged my schedule for your events. I celebrated your success while mine gathered dust. That's not fair." No, it wasn't fair. None of it was fair. I stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, the eyes I'd once thought held all the answers. But the most unfair part? I still believed in us. Even when you were coming home late, even when you were distant, even when you were sharing our private jokes with another woman in our favorite cafe, I still believed we could fix things. That's my shame to bear. He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Claire, I still care about you. I still want you in my life. Maybe not as my wife, but But what? As your friend? Your confidant? The woman you call when things get tough with Sophia? I shook my head, pity replacing some of the anger. You don't get to decide how I exist in your life anymore. That's what divorce means, Richard. I'm not an option you can keep on the shelf for when you need validation. Back in the conference room, the negotiations continued. Richard's attorney pushed for Richard to retain full rights to his literary works. Jessica countered with evidence of my substantial editorial contributions, my sacrifices to support his career. In the end, we reached a settlement that acknowledged my role in his success, a percentage of royalties from the books I'd helped edit, half of our joint assets, and a clean break with no ongoing financial entanglements. When Richard signed the preliminary agreement, his hand trembled slightly. I signed with a steady hand, the pen gliding across the paper as if it were cutting the last threads that bound us together. As I wrote my maiden name, Claire Winters, I felt something shift inside me. A weight lifting, a door closing, a window opening somewhere else. I hope you find what you're looking for, Richard said as we prepared to leave. I studied his face one last time, memorizing it not with love but with the clear-eyed gaze of someone saying goodbye to a stranger who had once been everything. I already am. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I stood in front of my creative writing class at Emerson College, where I'd secured a position as an adjunct professor. 25 eager faces looked back at me, notebooks open, pens poised. Writing, I told them, is an act of survival. Sometimes, the stories we tell ourselves are the only things keeping us afloat in rough waters. I knew this truth intimately now. In the months since leaving Richard, I'd poured myself into the manuscript I'd abandoned years ago. Night after night, I sat at my small desk in my studio apartment, fingers flying across the keyboard, excavating emotions I'd buried, crafting characters who faced betrayal and emerged stronger. The writing wasn't just therapeutic, it was transformative. With each chapter, I reclaimed pieces of myself I'd surrendered during my marriage. My new apartment was nothing like the book-filled space I'd shared with Richard. It was minimalist, almost Spartan, with white walls I'd left deliberately bare. The only decoration was a framed quote from Virginia Woolf: "A woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction." Both were mine now. The settlement money had given me breathing room, allowing me to reduce my teaching load and focus on writing. The royalty payments from Richard's books arrived quarterly, a bittersweet reminder of my contributions to his success, but also the fuel for my own emerging voice. I hadn't spoken to Richard since the mediation. Mutual friends told me he and Sophia had moved to New York, where he was working on a screenplay adaptation of his novel. I found I could think of them now without that sickening lurch in my stomach. The pain hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had transformed into something different. A dull ache that reminded me of lessons learned, rather than a sharp stab of fresh betrayal. Jessica had become a steadfast friend, hosting dinner parties where she deliberately seated me next to eligible men. I appreciated her efforts but wasn't ready. The thought of opening myself to that kind of vulnerability again made me recoil. Instead, I was dating myself, taking myself to movies I wanted to see, cooking elaborate meals for one, spending weekends exploring parts of Boston I'd never visited despite living here for years. "Professor Winters?" A student's voice pulled me from my thoughts. "You mentioned our midterm project?" I smiled, returning to the present. "Yes, thank you, Emma. Your midterm will be a personal essay exploring a moment of transformation in your life. Not just what happened, but how it changed you. The person you were before versus the person you became after." After class, I lingered in the empty classroom, gathering my notes. My phone buzzed with an email notification. I nearly dropped it when I saw the sender. Avery Mitchell, the editor I'd queried at Blackstone Publishing 3 weeks ago. With trembling fingers, I opened the message. "Dear Ms. Winters, thank you for sending your manuscript. The Invisible Wife. I read it in one sitting last night, something I rarely do these days. Your portrayal of a woman reclaiming her identity after living in the shadow of her husband's success is both timely and timeless. The prose is sharp, the emotions raw and authentic. I'd like to offer you a publishing contract." The rest of the email blurred as tears filled my eyes. I sat heavily in the nearest chair, reading and rereading the words until they sank in. My story, my pain transformed into art, had resonated with someone. It would be a real book, with my name on the cover. Later that evening, I sat on my small balcony overlooking the Charles River, a glass of wine in hand, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and pink. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, the devoted wife who had made herself small to make room for her husband's greatness. I barely recognized her now. The irony wasn't lost on me. Richard's betrayal, the thing I thought would destroy me, had instead forced me to rebuild myself from the foundation up. Without him, I'd rediscovered my voice, my ambition, my worth. I'd learned that heartbreak, like any wound, eventually forms a scar, a mark that remains, but no longer bleeds, a reminder of pain endured and survived. My phone rang, Jessica calling to confirm our weekend plans. I'd told her about the book deal earlier, and she'd insisted on celebrating. "I've invited some friends," she'd said, "including Michael from my office, the one I told you about who teaches rock climbing on weekends." I'd laughed and told her I wasn't ready to date. But now, watching the sky turn from pink to purple, I wondered if perhaps I was closer than I thought. Not because I needed someone to complete me. I'd learned that lesson the hard way. But because I was finally whole enough on my own to share my life from a place of strength rather than need. My manuscript sat on my laptop, ready for final revisions before sending it back to Avery. The dedication page was still blank. For months, I'd struggled with what to write there. Now, the words came to me with perfect clarity. For the woman I was, who gave too much. For the woman I am, who found her way back. And for anyone who has ever lost themselves in loving someone else, may you remember that your story is still being written. As darkness fell over Boston, I made a silent promise to myself. I would never again become invisible. I would never again make myself small. I would never again edit my life to fit someone else's narrative. My story was my own now, and it was just beginning.